All right, Joseph. Nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm doing great, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome, and thank you for what you've achieved here. Pay attention to Bitcoin. Really enjoyed it, and I want to dig into a couple of aspects of it here, which I think is going to go a long way to helping people round out their knowledge about certain historical events. And for those people that are new and finding Bitcoin for the first time and following us down the rabbit hole, I think it's going to help them filling a lot of the blanks of what's been happening, before to get us to this point. But before I do anything, I have to give Lauren the mic so she can ask the first question.
Hello.
Hi, Lauren.
Um, so my question is, what made you write a book?
For me, the best way to learn about something is to write about it. And I've got a background in English literature, and I was always writing book reviews. And when I started when I started studying Bitcoin, I thought, hey, if I really want to understand money and what this thing's all about, I should apply my academic skills and write something. So it really just started as an initial essay called "The Evolution of Money," and I wrote that a couple of years ago. And I was like, well, this is fascinating. That went well. And I was like, but I don't really know the origins of money so well. I don't really understand gold so well. And so I realized I got to do my homework. And so I started reading a bunch and then stacked a few more essays. And then finally I was like, hey, this could be a book. So I made an outline and went for it.
Wow. Wow. Um, oh, I have another question. What was
Mhm.
the hardest part on writing the book? Because I've asked some other people and they said it was the ending.
Oh, okay. That's a great question. For me, the hardest part was getting to Bitcoin. So, like, writing the history of the Federal Reserve and like the history of gold, that was like, I had to read a bunch of dense, papers from like the St. Louis Fed and all this stuff. And I didn't want to be wrong, because I was writing a book about it. So it was like all that research. And then finally, when I crossed that hump took like 3 or 4 months to actually feel like I could wrap my head around like how the money worked. And even just at an introductory level, like a scholastic 101 level, not even like deep econ or anything. But once I got through that and it got to the Bitcoin, ooh, that's when it got fun. And everything just kind of cruised from there. As far as the ending, my initial scope was like super big. And I realized that if I tightened my scope, that I could get through it. And that's kind of an advice I have for any writer is like narrow your scope. It's something that English or humanities teacher told me once when I was a senior in high school. And he said, if you want to write an essay, burn a hole. And really, what he means is sharpen your scope and then dig in and dig in and dig in. And that's, to me, that's how you get to the end of a good book.
Okay. Well, thank you and well done.
Well,
Yes,
yeah,
very well
absolutely.
done.
All right. Well, I think those are all my questions. So,
All right.
have a good day. Bye bye.
Great. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Lauren.
So thanks, Joseph. And I want to set this one up actually for the listeners. You've actually you've kind of mentioned part of what I want to go into here, and it is the Fed, because I think you do an incredible job towards the beginning of the book in the first 3 or 4 chapters, going through like what they do and how money does come into the system. What
Hmm.
did you called it? I've not heard this term before. A Gordian knot,
Yeah, a Fiat Gordian knot.
right? Do you want to explain what that is?
Well, you know, gosh, the Fed is, yes, I do. Basically, the idea is the Fed is purposefully opaque, and how they put money into the system is not really well known. When we think of the Fed, we think currently of, Jerome Powell telling us if he's going to raise or lower interest rates, the borrowing rates for banks at, a podium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And that's sort of the whole scope. People are like, okay, that's the Fed. Uh, but it goes deeper than that. The FOMC controls the Fed funds rate. and the
That's the
FOMC.
Federal Open Market Committee, right?
Exactly, the
Yes.
Federal Open Market, of which Jerome Powell's on it. But one of the fun facts that came out of this book that most people don't know is that there's 12 Federal Reserve banks in the U.S. and 5 of them have a seat. 5 of the presidents always have a seat on the FOMC. So the rest of them are appointed by Congress. And so to some extent, you could say that it is federal, but the other 5 presidents are privately selected. In particular, the New York Fed, which makes sense because that's where all the money kind of is. They're the powerhouse Fed, and think of Wall Street in the stronghold of the financial center in the States. The New York Fed president always has a seat on the FOMC, always, no matter what. And then the other, St. Louis and San Francisco and Minneapolis, they rotate. They pop in and out of the FOMC. But what that means is that a private president has perpetual influence on the borrowing rates for banks, and that was sort of the beginning of the fiat Gordian knot. And then the second prong to it, which was really interesting to me, was that when the Fed buys and sells treasuries, which are just like debt securities on the open market, it's kind of like, well, what is that and where does that happen? And it turns out it happens at a place called the desk at the New York Fed. And, it's the name for the person that buys and sells treasuries from the Fed is the desk is called the SOMA system. Yeah, it's an acronym. I'd have to check it real quick, but it's called SOMA. And that was another, I've noticed that sometimes when I do research, it's the System Open Market Account, and it's located at the Fed of New York, which is 33 Liberty Street.
So just this is fascinating, this part. So the desk, as you explain in the book,
and
that's capital D.
That with capital T, capital D, and that's how they print it.
Right, and you've got one person sitting there, and that's called the SOMA. What's the acronym again? Just
System Open Market Account. That's the name for the account that buys and sells T-bills on the open market.
Here's the time for us all to sit back and put on our tinfoil hats.
A little bit of tinfoil coming.
The same acronym was used in Aldous Huxley's book, The Brave New World, as you point out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that as any diligent researcher goes deeper and burns that hole, that you'll find parallels or synchronicities. And one of these is that, Soma in Brave New World numbed the masses, right? It was the drug that people would take and go to the feelies, the bread in the circuses, the movies, and all that jazz. Similarly, the Soma technician injects money or liquidity into the market or contracts it in order to control the way that we feel about the economy. So there is a very uncanny parallel between Soma, the drug, and the System Open Market Account, which happens at the New York Fed. And so that's kind of the second prong to the Gordian knot. The other thing the Fed does, which is kind of, and that's just, I love Brave New World and all of those dystopic sci-fi, books that are, like kind of harbingers of the way things could go. And I do think that, we're anesthetized by money printing. And, that happened in the 2020s with, the whole event of 0% interest rates and responding to this national or international bird flu. And really, what happened was everybody got their stimulus checks and sort of had their own version of Soma sort of disseminated to them. And what they didn't realize is that finance is a zero-sum game. So if they're printing, it's going to come out on us on the back end. And that's why you have all these TikTok videos about the price of groceries and stuff like that, you know, but it just takes a while for that to reach its actualization. So here we are in 2024, prices are up across the board, and we're not fiscally off better for having done that. That's SOMA printing, if you will. And why are they calling this SOMA too? Like, that's so wild. I mean, come on. It's also located at 33 Liberty Street. Like, you could put a little more tinfoil on your hat with that one. And just the fact that New York Fed guy.
Tell people the significance of the number 33.
Well, it has a lot of significance. It's a Masonic number is the primary thing that people know, but there's also, you know, 33 vertebrae in the spine, and there's all these kind of numerical, magical things about master numbers and numbers that repeat and things like that. But yeah, there's 33 degrees in masonry, and a 33rd degree mason is considered a master mason. And there's probably some ties between the origins of our country and masonry. And then, you know, when they privatized the banking system in 1913, after a bunch of bankers met, you know, off an island in the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island, they really sort of formed a cabal to control finances. And that's when all of these sort of encodings were probably set. And we've been on a one-way crash course towards hyperinflation, even though it is a slow trickle ever since.
Yes, it certainly is. And we're going to come back to the 4 points, the 4 things that the Fed do today, because
sure.
I do want to jump around in history and timelines a little bit. And
yeah, let's do it. People, wherever you want to go.
For people listening or watching, if you like, you should do a deep dive onto the formation of the Federal Reserve. And the best book for that, I find, is The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. He goes so deep in this. In fact, he did all of his research in the Congressional Library in 1948 when he was putting this together. He has minutes. Wow. He has minutes from the meetings in Congress between 1910 and 1913. Between the meetings being put together, the meeting being put together and its final enactment. And there is so much meat in there. It's unbelievable, the characters at play. And yes, all of these little coincidences just keep to, you know, they always seem to crop up somehow. If you're looking, if you're willing to look and do the research and read the books. But I do want to talk about Executive Order 6102 as well. But I think a fun aside is just to let people know, because I love your little story in there about how you found Bitcoin first time. You were at Burning Man, I think.
Yeah, it was Burning Man.
Right, in 2012?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to give people your little journey and take us through, you know, between 2012 and 2024 now, having released the book?
Absolutely. So I was doing my master's work at University of Southern California, and I'd done a presentation on alternate currencies. I was really fascinated with keeping money in a local economy and not having it be extracted. So one of the things I studied was like Berkshire bucks and just basically how people create microeconomies at farmers markets and stuff like that. So I was really interested in that. I'd heard a little bit about Bitcoin, but I didn't really know what it was. And so anyway, popped out to Burning Man in 2012, and I was thumbing through the brochure, and I saw there was this thing, and it said Bitcoin. Like, you know, a private currency, or like a, you know, an indestructible blockchain, or like freedom money. It's some sort of subtext. And I just looked at it and I was like, I got to check this out. I want to learn more about it. So I went to the tent. Someone was doing some boring PowerPoint, and it was full of people that I would classify as antisocial. And just, this is the initial set. I wouldn't be surprised if core developers were, you know, in the room at that time, early core developers. And I was just all ears, and I listened. And then I know one of the things I noticed is at the end of the presentation, a couple of the audience members kind of popped up. It was almost like a jubilee or something, where like the spirit would enter someone and they'd be like, pop up and be like, praise, you know, it like felt like that. But they got up and they're like, this money's going to change the world, or like, this is totally like, this is the new freedom tech. And I was like, wow. So I hung around after and talked to some of those guys, and just to learn more. And then so, fast forward a couple of weeks, and as I left the Playa, I think I wrote in the book, the intention to purchase this Bitcoin sort of whisked off me like the dust of the Playa. And I got back to Los Angeles and continued my graduate work. And I had this idea about maybe buying some Bitcoin, but I Googled it, and I was like, there was no straightforward way to purchase it. So I really just kind of put it on a shelf and said, okay, I'm interested in this, but I don't know how to engage. And that's one of those adoption curve things. It was so early in the adoption curve. It was difficult. The barrier to entry was very high, so flash forward about 4 years or something, and Bitcoin started to become more popular, and some of those companies came online like Coinbase and so forth that lowered the adoption curve. And I said, okay, I'm going to get back into this. I fired up a newsletter. I started researching it. And I kind of went down the whole crypto, top 100 list. Bitcoin was very much the primary interest even initially. But I was interested in all the projects, and I thought, DAOs are going to reorganize how we structure businesses and everything. So, that's when I sort of stepped into the market. I would call myself like class of 2017. But I hadn't done enough research. And this is something that I would encourage everyone to do. People say stack sats. I like to say stack data or stack knowledge, because I sold. So when it went back down, I didn't have the conviction to understand. I didn't know what I was holding. You know what I mean? So I got nervous, and what do you call it? Like paper-handed my bags. And was like, oh, I lost money. I'm done with this Bitcoin stuff. And, even though I'd written, many newsletters and started researching heavily. And so long story short, like most people, Bitcoin became popular again in the class of 2020. Okay, let's take another look. And I was like, all right, this time I'm not going to be shook out. And so that's when I had the idea. I was like, well, if I want to do this right, I should write about it. So that's when I started writing that first essay, The Evolution of Money, and many books, thousands of articles, and just hundreds of hours of podcasts later. And I think that I can safely say I have some idea about what's going on in the market, and certainly enough resilience to handle any future bear markets.
It's funny as well, in the book you were talking about how you were going to write that other book, take everybody through the evolution of crypto and DeFi, this and that and the other thing, and thank goodness.
Oh my gosh, much ado about nothing. That whole journey of thinking that I could cover all of that, DeFi and this whole arena. And that gets back to what I had mentioned to Lauren with her opening question, which is like really the idea, if you want to write something great, narrow your focus. You know what I mean? I think that people lose the scope and they lose their ability to finish a project because they didn't scope it. So once I realized, I listened to Robert Breedlove appeared on a Lex Friedman podcast. And Lex Friedman, as we know, is a very mainstream, well, I mean, you could call him alternative, but like a very popular podcaster. And Robert was just talking about this idea, correlating Bitcoin with the ability to control your own finances. And that's when, my interest in those early microeconomies and what Bitcoin could do clicked. And that's when I was like, oh, that's it. The book's about Bitcoin. Pay attention to Bitcoin. That's the entire, that's going to get me to the end of it. And what's crazy about Bitcoin is much like those Berkshire bucks, which is like, if you use a local economy, the good thing is like, wealth is not extracted from the community, from credit card rips and all that kind of stuff. And so that's great locally. But what I realized that Bitcoin is Bitcoin functions like a microeconomy on a worldwide scale. So it's non-extractive, but it's also geographically diversified.
I hope Lex, he's had Rob on the show. He's had Michael Saylor on the show. He's had
Mhm.
Dean was Safe on there as well,
I'm not sure if
and
Safe went on next, but
Nick Carter.
yeah.
No, Safe was
Oh,
on Jordan
Nick
Peterson. That's
Carter's
one.
great, by the way.
Yeah.
He's just
If
such a
Lex
great
hasn't
writer.
if Lex hasn't bought any Bitcoin after sitting down with these three guys for 2 hours at a time,
Yeah,
I don't know what
he
to tell
can't be
you.
helped. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
yeah,
you're
there's no
right.
helping after that point.
You need to build conviction, and this is something I want listeners to take away from this is if you haven't put in the work to build conviction, you will be shaken out of your Bitcoin.
Mm.
It's happened to so many people.
Hmm.
Happened to all of us. And this is why we preach just stack sats, don't get over
Right.
your skis, set up a plan, don't leverage,
Right.
just hodl, self-custody, and see this thing through for 8 to 12 years, and you will be fine. But people, they see if it ramps up too quickly, they sell. If it
Mm.
dumps down too quickly, they sell because they don't have the conviction. And the conviction only comes from reading the books. But
Hmm.
to read the books, we need the authors. So it's a chicken and egg, right? So thank you again for writing your book. We don't have enough, even though my bookcase is overfilling and I've got a stack of one. I've even got PDFs being emailed to me now.
Right, I'm
So there's
sure.
more
Which is
coming.
just that's fantastic news, by the way. We love
Yeah.
that. You know, my Bitcoin book is one way to look at it. There's a little bit of philosophy there with the idea of paying attention, and there's only a single unit of account, and where attention converges, value accrues, and so there's a little bit of nuance there. But beyond that, I'd say it's a generally readable 101 Bitcoin book.
Mm-hmm.
It's not trying to do anything too amazing. Uh, and when you talk about stacking, you know reading the books and stacking knowledge, I really think the time for that, think of it seasonally. Like, you really want to be learning about it in the bull market when prices are going up, when everyone's glued to their screen, and CoinGecko prices are, they can't take their eyes off the Twitter feed. That's actually the best time to step away and say, I should really just learn about what I'm holding, you
Mm-hmm.
know
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then you can weather the storm, and you can weather the storm. I always say, if you buy Bitcoin, think about it like you just voted for a president. Like, you're going to enjoy some of the things they do, you're going to dislike some of the things they do, but you're stuck with them for 4 years, and so, like, if you think about your Bitcoin like something you voted for that has to lock in for 4 years. Everyone knows this fun fact, but we've never seen a 4-year date to date time period where Bitcoin didn't yield a gain. So that's pretty impressive for an asset that's so nascent.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just to really emphasize that point, doesn't matter at what day you bought Bitcoin during that 4 years, even if you bought the absolute tippy top of the
Yeah,
blow off top,
exactly.
4 years later, it's going to be higher. Always has
Hmm.
been, and I'm pretty sure always will be. But
Mm.
you've got to put in the work in that time to, that's what turns people off, put in the work, right? No one wants to work in air quotes. They just want the free lunch. That's what we all are
Yeah.
designed to want.
And that's why people are attracted to that laundry list of alternative cryptocurrencies, because people want to get, oh, I want a 10x, I want a 20x gain in 2 weeks. It's like, the opening quote to my book is from Proverbs, and it's like, wealth gained by honesty will increase. Maybe you could read it for me. Open that first,
Yeah.
just right at the top of the book.
Oh, chapter one or acknowledgements
Nope.
or
Actually, all the way to the beginning of the book.
okay.
Well, I could grab it. Let me
Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gathers by labor will increase.
And if people can just drill that thesis into their mind, which is like, there's no free lunch here. Like, you have to work for it. And like the Bitcoiners that have held, they learned, they worked. And it also gets back to this idea that Bitcoin is, it's a proof of work coin. You know what I mean? And that's really what makes it honest money. This money has a handshake with real world energy, incredible amounts of real world energy on the scale of, amount powering 10 American homes, to mine one Bitcoin block or something. But that's real. And that energy has a handshake with reality. And that means, and that's how that It's stored digitally. It's the first time we've been able to capture real world energy, drop it on the internet, and store it with a long shelf life. And that's why it's a coin with integrity, you know. And you look at these other coins, sure, maybe they're crypto technology plays. That's fine. You're buying Nvidia stock. You're speculating on on a security. Sure, no problemo. But just understand that with a single unit of account, all value accrues to the base layer. And the base layer is going to be where the honest money is. And Bitcoin's going to hold that value, probably for longer than we're even around.
And if anybody wants to dive into Parker Lewis's essay on that, it's called Bitcoin Obsoletes All Other Forms of Money. And that's part of his book, Gradually Then Suddenly. But that essay is just widely available on the Unchained blog or anywhere actually on the internet.
Yeah.
You'll find it. Just type in Parker. And
it's so another one, just another plug, is Nick Carter's essay on the Harvard Business Review, which is just a much faster read, but it gives you a real glimpse into how energy and Bitcoin interrelate. So you can just look that up. NIC Carter, Harvard Business Review. That came out like 3 years ago, but it's a great read.
Now, Executive Order 6102. You did a nice job here as well, digging into this. And this we have something in common here. I was invited to write a chapter for Brian DeMint's book called Parallel. And my chapter was about the education system and societal order, but also I dug into a Executive Order 6102 and the formation of the Fed. And I don't think enough people are paying attention to it's kind of a trope in the Bitcoin, it's a meme, don't self-custody your Bitcoin.
Yeah. Don't get 6102'd.
Yeah, exactly.
But nobody really unpacks it.
I want to unpack it with you. I want to go through it, because when you actually read it and you go point by point, you see, oh my, this was America. Like you can't believe it. And the timing of it as well.
It was the largest American heist in history. I mean, the purchase power of the dollar devalued by over 40% in 1 year, which is
and this at a time
just ridiculous.
Just coming out of the Great Depression. Like talk about stamping your feet on the face of the American people. Like, just okay, you've just got out of the Great Depression, which was orchestrated by Wall Street in the first place. And the pullers of strings, basically the Federal Reserve. And then their president-elect, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who what was the feeling of him in America, just in general? If you're looking at normie land, NPC land, what did
I mean, the New Deal. I mean, everyone,
right?
It was we became more, if you want to call it democratic.
For the global listeners, what the New Deal is, because I know that's what's pushed through the American education system about FDR, his New Deal, and how great it was for America.
Okay, the one second here. Let me just get a sip of this coffee. All right. Well, the best way to discuss this is to discuss what I know, and as opposed to giving you cliff notes on the New Deal, let's just talk about what actually happened. So, up until 1933, and this is so that I can give you as much data with as high signal as possible. Up until 1933, gold is valued at about $20 per troy ounce. Okay, so March 6, 1933, FDR, he calls what's called a bank holiday. And they called it a holiday because they obviously inverted it, but it just meant all the banks closed and they suspended all exchanges of gold. So gold at $20 an ounce. All right, that was March 6, 1933. Less than a month later, on the 5th of April, 1933, Executive Order 6102 was issued. Okay. And so what that meant is that if you didn't bring all your gold to the nearest Federal Reserve, you could be fined $10,000 and spend up to 10 years in prison. So that scared the shit out of the American people. and they all brought their gold to the nearest Federal Reserve branch, whether that was St. Louis or San Francisco or Minneapolis, what have you. Now, once the Fed got control of all the gold, now we're in 1934, just 1 year later, gold was repriced to $35 per troy ounce. So what that means, and that was the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. And what that means is the value of the dollar in relation to gold was debased in terms of its purchasing power by 41%. And so that was just massive. Fun side note, the people that didn't bring their gold into the Fed when the 6102 was issued were maligned in the news as hoarders. That's where the term hoarder actually comes from. Interestingly, today we have a similar term, hodlers, for Bitcoin. There's a correlation there. So they debased the dollar by 41%, and they got all the gold. Now that they had all the gold, then that's where we get into what happened, where gold became the worldwide standard. And so everybody knows that in 1971, Nixon closed the gold window, and we can talk about why. It was initially supposed to be temporary, but it has continued to this day through 2024. But even whilst it was illegal to hold gold in the United States as a citizen, somehow we managed to convince the entire world to use the dollar as the world reserve currency, and that we would back it by gold. So there was an international double standard going on where the citizens in the United States couldn't hold gold, but we had convinced all the United Nations countries to use the dollar as the international unit of account and let us hold their gold. So long story short, Charles de Gaulle got pissed off, and he brought a warship outside New York Harbor just before 1971 and was like, yo, give us our gold back. And they were like, we don't want to. And they're like, well, we brought this warship. So they're like, all right, France, you can have your gold. They give the gold back to France. Nixon goes out shortly thereafter and slams shut the gold window. That was the closing of the gold window, 15th of August, 1971. And so ever since then, in the book, I call that that time is the day the dollar floated away. And there's a fun fact that is similar to the Soma Easter egg that we found doing the research on the Fed, is that even though the gold window closed on the 15th of August, 1971, that was just by edict. It didn't actually pass into law on paper through Congress until April 1st, 1978. So the day the dollar floated away officially was April Fool's Day, which I just thought was poetic irony.
Unbelievable. And there's a few things here as well, because I've been digging around again after reading your book, and I went back and read what I wrote in Brian's book here, and did a little bit of extra digging. And there's a few things that stood out. So his first ever executive order, where am I going to get it from? Yeah, so Roosevelt took office on the 4th of March, 1933. In his acceptance speech, he stated, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. So this was the thing that basically got everybody all revved up, the New Deal, FDR's New Deal this, New Deal that. It's still a huge trope in American folklore. 5 days later, after he was inaugurated, on the 9th of March, 1933, President Roosevelt signed the Emergency Banking Act, which gave the 12 regional banks of the Federal Reserve the power to issue additional currency on good assets so that they could stay solvent. So first thing he does, Emergency Banking Act. Who does that help? The Federal Reserve and their 12 member banks. And you think, coincidence? Maybe, I don't know. It also gave Roosevelt the power to provide relief if he were ever to declare a national emergency.
Yeah,
So,
that's a big one.
what do you think the national emergency was? Just weeks later, and by leaning on his newfound power of declaring a national emergency, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102 on the 5th of April, 1933. If people, and honestly, people still think we're a couple of conspiracy theorists, even though we're surrounded by books and research and whatever else, and we've gone down the rabbit holes and we've found this stuff out. And
Yeah, I
I
mean,
want to go through it.
we're
But
historians.
here's another thing I found today, which is going to get everybody.
What do you got?
So, he obviously, when you become president, you start appointing your team, right? You make your picks. That's what Trump's doing at the moment.
Right.
And he ran on this idea of bringing in the New Deal. So for the New Deal, you're going to have a director of budget, right? You're going to have somebody there to direct all of that. Guess who he named as director of budget? I only found this one out just an hour before we got on the call. None other than James Paul Warburg, son of Paul Warburg, who created the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
He was the master plan who was there in the United States at the behest of the Rothschild banking dynasty from Europe. So you're like, what? Hang on a second. The guy that set up the whole thing, his son is now director of budget for FDR, who is about to roll out the New Deal, which is basically printing a shit ton of money into the system.
Yeah.
And yank everybody's gold.
Right. And so for the modern people, just think the New Deal was just like COVID 1.0 or whatever.
And clincher.
You know what I mean? Money printing 1.0. Go ahead.
To bring you back to number 33 and Freemasonry. Were you aware that FDR was a Grand Master Freemason?
No, I was not.
I mean, well, there you go. Have we done full circle now? Have we?
Yeah, I mean, that is a full circle. So in New York, the New York Fed is located at 33 Liberty Street, and yeah, I mean, you can always dig deeper and find even more stuff.
It goes even more when you start looking. His wife, Eleanor, his fifth cousin, basically. She came from the other Roosevelt side, the previous president, and apparently they fell in love naturally and then had kids. Right. But you can dig into that rabbit hole yourself.
With the quote unquote elite class, it's usually more of an arranged marriage situation. Like, oh, let's fold the power of this dynasty into the power of that dynasty.
So let's do
read more of it.
Let's do the points of 6102.
Sure.
I had them here. Section 1. Right, here we go. For the purposes of this regulation, the term hoarding or hodling, as you might now say, if we use today's example of us evil hodlers of Bitcoin, of scarce assets. So for the purposes of this regulation, the term hoarding means the withdrawal and withholding of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates from the recognized and customary channels of trade. The term person means any individual, partnership, association, or corporation. So, like you point out in the book, you are shamed for being a hoarder. You are cancelled for being. How dare you? You are ruining the economy, and we've got this coming.
Oh, you think there's going to you think they'll 6102 Bitcoin?
I think they'll make an example of hodlers as being the downfall of.
Yeah, I could see there being kind of a smear campaign, which gets into this Edward Bernays part of the book about propaganda, which is like, what we call PR today was originally propaganda, and was kind of pioneered by this guy named Edward Bernays, who was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And he wrote a short book called Propaganda, basically about how to control the masses. And in the book, there's a quote that just basically says, like, the minds of the masses are controlled by a small few. And so to bring it back to your point, Daniel, like, it's very possible that there could be a smear campaign around people that self-custody Bitcoin. Like, why don't you keep it? Like, for example, when Wells Fargo and JP Morgan and Citibank, when they all come online and they get their permissions to custody Bitcoin, there's going to be a huge top level campaign for people to not custody their own coins. And it's going to be, and they're going to do that, you know, in every which way they can. One, they'll incentivize holding it by giving you better fiat loan rates or whatever you want, just so long as you give them the coins. Then on the other side, they'll work the angles. All the print periodicals and the newspapers are all going to start coming out saying, well, hoarding is dangerous and like it's bad for the country and it's not protecting us. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see it go that far. As far as executive edict, I don't think they'll do that because it looks like this is going to be, you know, kind of slurped up by the powers that be. It looks like they're on board for Bitcoin now. Just in the last 48 hours, you had, you know, Trump, Putin, I don't know, Bukele, who is the other big player. Jerome Powell came out and called Bitcoin digital gold. Like, we are way past the Overton window now for mainstream top level adoption of Bitcoin. So I think 6102 is out of order, but I do think that, or Bitcoin 6102, but I do think that there will be, I think that the OG Bitcoiner that has sovereign control of their funds will be maligned and smeared, and possibly even to the extent where they might say you're not allowed to bring your sovereign assets across geopolitical lines. It could, even though they can't stop that, they could very well, you know, try to put strictures around where Bitcoin can go if they want to preserve wealth in one geopolitical center. So all of those things I would say are on the table, which is all the more reason to hodl and to, you know, put your stuff in cold storage and control your own money. Like, do you remember the first time you actually figured out how to get Bitcoin off of an exchange and into your own wallet? And then like you woke up the next day and you're like, oh my God, I'm actually controlling my money. It is a profound revelatory moment that I would love every listener out there to experience. It is, I mean, it's sublime. Even if you're just doing it with $100 or whatever, it's like the equivalent of cash under the mattress on steroids. I mean, this thing is, it's so cool that you can control your own money. And the fact that you can move millions or billions of dollars in a span of 10 to 60 minutes anywhere in the world to anybody you want is actually a perfection. It's like the apotheosis of where money was always trying to go. It's not controlled. It's not debased. It's not inflated. It's actually, it's the equivalent of what used to be gold. But instead of us losing 41% of our purchasing power in a year, we're doubling our purchasing power in a year.
And again, this comes back to conviction, because if when they do try and shame you for hodling and start making all of these arbitrary laws, you're not going to be able to do this. Like in Europe, they were trying to ban self-hosted wallets. Like that was a thing on the table. And people would have been shaken out of Bitcoin if they didn't understand, if they didn't have the conviction behind them. All of the maxis were like, oh my God, you go ahead, try. You've just exposed how little you understand. But that's a small part of the community. Some people holding Bitcoin would have woken up that morning, seen those headlines, like, right, I got it right. I'm getting rid of that. Back into cash, because cash is king, and you know, it's been a good run, and just because they haven't put the work in after buying it. Now, coming back to Ed Bernays, the king of propaganda.
Oh man, that guy got women smoking cigarettes. He put presidents in office. He helped overthrow South American dictatorships. That guy was everywhere. He's the guy that put meat and potatoes back on the all-American breakfast table. Like, people were eating like light breakfasts, and he like worked with the pork company. And they're like, you got to get bacon going again. I mean, the guy just did everything. He put fluoride in toothpaste.
No,
he's the guy that came up with 4 out of 5 dentists. So crazy.
It is. And you said he had family ties with Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, it was Freud's nephew.
So yeah, psychoanalytics. So basically knows how to. I mean, he's the original algo, right? He knows what to do, how to affect people. Psyop, right? Classic psyop.
Yeah.
Can I read you the? Do you know the founder of Netflix?
No, I don't recall.
His name is Mark Bernays Randolph.
In relation?
Bernays, named after his great uncle, Ed Bernays. Come on,
Thank you for
guys.
that,
It's so
Princey.
obvious.
That's such a drop. What? And
You
then you
can
think about
anyone right
Netflix.
now
Not
stop
look at
this. Go to
Netflix.
Wikipedia. Mark Randolph,
Yeah,
Netflix. It's all there.
right.
He has
And
lines to Sigmund Freud as well on
if
both.
there, wow,
Yeah,
just let me correlate that real quick. If there ever was a Soma drip right now, like the equivalent of the Feelies in Huxley's Brave New World, it's Netflix.
of
You know what I mean?
course.
It's that auto drip. Watch this scroll, like B level high propaganda content, just just
Mm-hmm.
all day long. It just inure the masses into idleness and docility, and
Mm-hmm.
boom, relation to Edward Bernays. No surprise there. What a gem! Thanks for that.
No
Wow,
problem.
that's epic. So that's what we're
So,
up against. But the good
and
news is like, the more agency you take of your reality, the more agency you take of your finances, the more
mhm,
agency you take out of your relationships and your lifestyle, you actually get in not in any sort of like hooey dooey sort of way, you actually get more powerful. You become
mhm,
like the opposite of inured, the opposite of like, think how you feel after binge watching a season of Netflix, something. We've all done it. Well, this is like the inverse antidote to that, which is like I control my reality. When I take a step into a room, it matters. You know what I mean? And like that's the kind of ethos that is the signal that your podcast is putting out and Breed Love's putting out. And I hope is going to really create a flourishing, which is I would love there to be the inverse of the New Deal, which is
mhm.
just like this Bitcoin expansion, where people become higher level of agency, higher trust in their local communities and really just flourishing. And whether that's, wherever that goes to each their own, but whatever improves their lifestyle and the lifestyle of those around them, which you need money to do, which
Yeah,
is why Bitcoin is it's that codex to the entire operating system.
yeah. That's the tool to
Mm-hmm.
help lift your life. Like
Mm.
that is what we need. The medium of exchange. That
Wow.
was a human discovery to
Right.
use a medium of exchange, and it's been co-opted and corrupted. So back to the formation of the Federal Reserve, many people would be aware that yes, that was you had Warburg and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan all very strong-handed in this, and it's another one of these gems I suddenly stumbled upon.
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Rockefeller. I'm sure you're aware of that particular person. Well, his full name is Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller
Oh,
because
wow.
he's named after his grandfather, Nelson Aldrich,
Mm-hmm.
who
And he
hosted
would,
the meeting
yeah,
at
I was
Jekyll
just going to
Island.
say, and I went out there in Georgia and saw the
Mm.
location just to kind of feel that it was kind of an eerie place and all these kind of hanging trees with this swooping energy and kind of like that old had
Is
this
it an
old
island? Is it
estate
an
vibe.
actual island?
Yeah, it's an actual island. You drive over a bridge off of the
Right.
coast of Georgia and you go to Jekyll Island and you'll park in your little tourist parking lot. You can kick around on the sidewalks and pop into the rooms where they met at. And I just did it
Really?
as I did it as part of my book
Yeah.
sort of journey, which was just I would give. It's the same reason I went down to Buenos Aires earlier this year, just to feel what a country experiencing a rapid inflation felt like, and actually finished most of the book. I wrote the last like 3 chapters in Buenos Aires. But yeah, similarly, I went to Jekyll Island and yeah, it just kind of had this eerie old energy. And but that's one of the reasons I wrote about like, like the Soma and the desk and the New York Fed. When you name these things, when you walk into the room on Jekyll Island, when you experience these things firsthand, it takes away the power because it goes back to the initial illusion is the opaqueness of it all.
Mm.
Oh, you don't understand. Oh, there's a veil, Wizard of Oz. You don't know what's going on. But you're like, no, it's called the desk. It's located at this place. They went to Jekyll Island in 1913. Aldrich was there. They took a train from New York. Like, not that, like, it's just when you start to understand the brass tacks of it, it takes away the mystical power of those prognostications at Jackson Hole and the Wizard of the Finance and all that kind of crapola. So that's one of the reasons I think we got to read these things. And if people want to, pay attention to Bitcoin, type it into Amazon, order it up, and beef up on some of these base facts.
There's the so with Jekyll Island, do you have to pay to get? Is it a tourist thing? Like
I think you pay for parking, like
but
a
you can
couple
go
bucks
in
for
the
parking.
house like that.
Yeah.
That really?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not a private house. It's just like open for anybody to walk in and go and check
No,
out.
you can have lunch there on the patio. They got a bar. You can walk.
Do they
I can
shill the
send you. I
fact
can
this is
send you a
where
couple. I took some great photos when I was there. I'll
yeah,
email you a batch of images from that
right.
location, just so that you can see that it was real hand. But no, it's not like go through the ticket booth and like now you're at Jekyll Island. It was just like a place.
So if you didn't know, you wouldn't have any kind of
No idea. There's no
realization.
plaque. There's no plaque that's like this is where the Federal Reserve started. The boardroom where they met though has a picture of some of them, and I took a photo of that, like hanging on the wall.
Wild.
Is that so? That's what I'm saying. Like this is the real information. You know what I mean? Like we're demystifying this whole thing. There's huge power in that, especially like your comment on Netflix. Like that's like a zap. I mean, just people knowing that alone changes the way that they would watch, and think. It's just excellent.
So
did you want to knock out the 4 things the Fed does, or should we just?
Yeah, I did want to do that. I was going to go
whatever.
section by section on 6102. We were only on one.
Oh man! All right. Well,
So
I'll be quiet for a while. You take the rodeo.
Section 2: all persons are hereby required to deliver. And remember that a person, the term person, means any individual, partnership, association, or corporation. Right? That was in section 1. All persons are hereby required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933. So what did they have here? A few weeks? Yeah. So they've got to deliver by 1st of May to a Federal Reserve Bank or a branch or agency thereof, or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System, all gold coin, gold bullion, gold certificates now owned by them or coming into their ownership on or before April 28th, 1933. What a rug pull.
Yeah, it's the biggest rug pull in financial history as far as I know. I mean, maybe something happened way back in the day, but in recent history, it's the biggest rug pull ever. I mean,
so section 3, until otherwise ordered, any person becoming the owner of any gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates after the 28th of April, 1933, shall within 3 days after receipt thereof deliver the same in the manner prescribed in section 2, unless such gold coin, bullion, or certificates are held for any of the purposes specified in paragraphs A, B, C. So it gets a little bit technical here, but basically you're on the hook for whatever's coming your way. You've got to get it to a bank, preferably a Federal Reserve member bank, otherwise any bank, because they would then have to turn that in themselves because they're a corporation, to a federal member bank closest to them. Now, number 4, upon receipt of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates delivered to it in accordance with sections 2 or 3, the Federal Reserve Bank or member bank will pay therefore an equivalent amount of any other form of coin or currency coined or issued under the laws of the United States. So basically, give us your gold, and this is what you were saying earlier, we'll hand you over US dollars.
20 bucks per
20
troy
bucks
ounce.
per ounce.
Mm-hmm.
Now, section 5, member banks shall deliver all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates owned or received by them to the Federal Reserve Banks of their respective districts and receive credit or payment therefor. Number 6, the Secretary of the Treasury, out of the sum made available to the President by section blah, 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 will in all proper cases pay the reasonable costs of transportation of gold coin. So they're even going to, they're going to pay your costs for the carriages and whatever else to bring
yeah.
the
I'll
gold.
take care of gas. Don't worry about it.
Unbelievable. Including the cost of insurance, protection, and such other incidental costs as may be necessary upon production of satisfactory evidence of such costs. So bring your receipts, guys. for all that gold that you're going to come and deposit in our banks. Otherwise, we will not pay your expenses. It's utter madness, truly. 7, in cases where the delivery of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates by the owners thereof within the time set forth above will involve extraordinary hardship or difficulty, the Secretary of the Treasury may, in his discretion, extend the time within such delivery must be made. So this is all the small print now that people don't ever read. But when you read it, you're like, oh, right. Yeah, these guys, this wasn't just whipped up. Like, this was thought through. Like, if we're going to rug the nation's gold, we better make fucking sure as shit there's no one with an excuse.
Yeah, or had to have a claim against them on the backside of it. What everyone remembers is the $10,000 or 10 years in prison.
Exactly.
And,
so let me.
And it is important, the big bullet points.
So number 9,
20. Go ahead.
Whoever willfully violates any provision of this executive order or of these regulations or of any rule, regulation, or license issued thereunder may be fined not more than $10,000, or if a natural person may be imprisoned for not more than 10 years, or both. And any officer, director, or agent of any corporation who knowingly participates in any such violation may be punished by like fine, imprisonment, or both. They weren't fucking around, guys.
I never found any, I'm not even sure anybody went to jail.
Threat
you know
violence.
what I mean? Like they made a really good airtight contract. They scared the shit out of everyone. Everyone brought their gold in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they debased it by 40%.
And this is like when we talk about 60, will Bitcoin be 6102? This will be the thing. Like, we're going to ban self-hosted wallets. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Bring them in. Give us your 12 words. Anybody that doesn't is going to jail. All this kind of stuff. Like, the playbook has been written.
I'm an optimist. I don't think we're going to get Bitcoin 6102. I think they'll take every which way and route they can before they make the legal claim that you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll incentivize it. Charles Schwab will give you 6% if you let them loan against it, or 8%,
Absolutely.
or 10%. They'll malign it in the papers. They'll get influencers do it. They'll make a Netflix series about a hodler who's anti-government and doesn't like the country, or who's some sort of nefarious character. They'll run that through the Bernays Jr. Netflix operation. They'll hit them every which way. And if the hodlers, who probably cannot be effed with, if it gets even further, maybe a 6102, but there will be plenty of road signs to take a bridge out of Dodge if you need to. Before that would be my take.
Yeah, I hope so. And for anybody listening, if you're holding any ETF Bitcoin, you're not holding Bitcoin. That's paper Bitcoin. Don't trust these guys.
100%. Coinbase doesn't even place proof of reserves. Like, I'm sure it's in their filings because they're a public company. And if you want to dig through like 6,000 pages of something, you can find it. But like, shout out to river.com and the fact that they actually are the first Bitcoin company that encourages you to take your coin off the exchanges. But proofs, they have proof of reserves. You can literally verify that they're holding X number of coins that they say they are. And that's the new Bitcoin standard. If you want to be a company that buys and sells Bitcoin in the future, you need to be a company that shows your customers that you have what you say you're buying for them. And that's, we're demystifying, taking the curtain back, and we're looking for, transparency with financial activities.
We had Obi Nwosu had the exchange here called CoinFloor in the UK, and they had proof of reserves. They were doing it the whole time. And I remember having him on the podcast, like 2020. I'm like, mate, how is everybody else doing this? Like, what? I don't know. I don't know. I think we do know, because there's goodness knows what is going on behind the curtain. And yeah.
Yeah, like, it's Coinbase. This is total conjecture, but like, one could ask, is Coinbase like rehypothecating or, in some way. I mean, they're holding like all of the Bitcoin for 8 of the 11 ETFs.
How?
That's massive. I think one of the only ones that, like, FBTC, I think they self custody, but IBIT and the rest of them are being held by Brian Armstrong. And granted, they're federally regulated, public companies, so there's definitely some guide rails in place there. But nope, nobody's seen proof of reserves. Like, we don't know. You know what
No.
I mean? And what's gonna, another angle they would take, Daniel, before they would 6102, would be to say, oh, there's a financial emergency. We need to Coinbase. We're going to need that for a little bit. No, we'll,
Yep.
we'll give it back to you. We'll pay you $20 per Bitcoin, the equivalent of what they did.
Mhm.
Oh, and then, turns out now Bitcoin went way up. Here's your $20 back. Like, they might try to claw back some of the institutional Bitcoin, which is why the thesis that you've been espousing and that I espouse is so clutch, which is like, you got to hold your coins. Is, Andreas Antonopoulos, it's not your coins, not your keys, not your coins.
Mhm.
But I think that they would do a clawback from an institutional level before they would try to outright ban it.
Absolutely. Go for the lowest hanging fruit, and that
Yeah,
is
exactly. And
institutional
then work your
Bitcoin.
way up the tree. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right. So the, the four things the Fed does. Let's get back to the Federal Reserve where this all
Yeah, let's
started.
do it.
So we've um, we've done a little bit about the formation. Meeting Jekyll Island, 1910, all in secret. 1913, they get the act through. Christmas week, half of Congress is out on their holidays, and they smash it through. So they get their bank. And now, what are the four things it does?
I'm going to give you the Federal Reserve in 2 minutes. Nobody's ever done it. The
Well
Federal
done.
Reserve, the Federal Reserve does four things. It settles transactions between banks. You ever seen that little ACH? That's the automated clearinghouse on the check. It takes 3+ days to settle. The automated clearinghouse is a for-profit service offered by the Fed. For small amounts, they use ACH. For big amounts, they use FedWire. First thing the Fed does, settle transactions between banks and charge a rip for it. The second thing the Federal Reserve does is determine bank reserve requirements. This is how much money the banks have to keep on hand in case customers want to get that money. So they can't rehypothecate all their money. They need to have some in the vault or at the nearest Federal Reserve Bank. Since COVID, the required amount is 0%. The third thing the Federal Reserve does is it gives loans to banks. Pretty simple. Gives loans to banks. This is what's called the Fed funds rate, and that is the cost of borrowing money from the Fed. Okay, and the fourth and final thing the Federal Reserve does is buy and sell treasuries on the open market. And this is what we know is the SOMA technician operating at the desk out of the New York Fed Bank at 33 Liberty Street. They're buying and selling. They're buying and selling. They want to pull money out of the market. You know what I mean? They sell a bunch of treasuries. They want to put money into the market. They buy a bunch of treasuries. So the Fed does four things: settles transactions, determines reserve requirements, gives loans and charges interest, and buys and sells on the open market. That's the Federal Reserve.
You make it sound simple.
Well, it is kind of simple. They're a money lending operation. But the trick is that when the Fed is injecting liquidity into the market, when that SOMA technician is buying up T-bills, give me those T-bills, treasuries, I'll take all your treasuries, take them. Money's going into the market. There's no limit to how much they can buy. They're literally just instantiating a credit deposit in the person that's selling them the treasury. They're just putting a credit deposit in their bank. Now that credit deposit does become money. The person that sold the T-bill can withdraw that, or they can leave it in the bank, in which case the bank will lend it back out. So that's how money gets stimulated into the economy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just crazy that there's no cap on it. I mean, it's really like it's a wizard type operation.
Perpetual inflation of the monetary base.
Exactly. I don't know what we're at today, but it's Just nuts.
36 trillion or something like national debt.
Something like that. I mean, it's so crazy.
And how many dollars in circulation? Like, what's the gap right now?
I don't even know. What's crazy is that most of the money in circulation isn't even dollars. It's just digital now. And it's not cryptographically secured digital. It's just funny money moving around on screens.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And that
absolutely.
was kind of the whole thesis of the book is like, people knock Bitcoin. Oh, it's not gold. It's just digital. It's just a digital ledger. It's like, well, look, we've been digital. We did credit cards and debit cards. Like we are moving into a digital economy. There's nothing stops that train. The question is, do you want it to be cryptographically secured digital, or do you want it to be funny money that the wizard at the Soma desk can just contract or expand like at will?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've all had that situation, I'm sure, where you've checked your bank account and there's $1,000 extra in there, or 1,000 too few dollars in there, and you email the bank or you call them up like, what's going on? Like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We'll figure that, and it's fine the next day. Either way.
Right.
You're like, well,
Right.
no one asks any questions. They're like, oh well, yeah, that was sorted out. That was great service. And then they'll say to Bitcoin, well, you explain to them, that's never happened in Bitcoin. What do you mean? That can't happen. Like that, there's, it either exists or it doesn't, and
Yeah.
you can't. First of all, that no mistake has been made, and it won't be made.
Well, it can't be made. I mean, every transaction settlement is final, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, the reason checks take so long to clear and credit cards have such a high rip when you use them to buy whatever is that that's not a finalized transaction. People can dispute the claim. They can claw it back. You can say you have funds and then you don't pay them. There's all these permutations for why that transaction can't work. I mean, really, one of the most profound things about Bitcoin is just final settlement. When it's done, when the transaction settles, that's it. You spent it or you received it, done data. And then you can't walk back the timeline, the time
Now,
chain, more specifically.
just so we don't just skim over a lot of this language.
Yeah.
T-bills, treasury bills. You do dive in and you explain what a lot of these things are, and I think it's worthy doing that because we can't just assume people understand what these terms mean. Treasury bills are debt securities that can be sold to mature at different time intervals. For example, 4-week, 8-week, 13-week, 26-week, and 52-week T-bills that promise a specified return over that given time period.
Instead of getting bogged down in the actual terms, T-bill is just commonly referred to as a debt security. But I think it's always simpler to zoom out. So the Fed so these securities are debt, and they can be, bought from the market or issued into the market, and they're issued into the market at different time intervals: short-term debt, medium-term debt, and long-term debt. Long-term debt would be like 5 to 10 years, and they give them different names, like bills or notes or what have you. But they're all just forms of debt. They're debt instruments that the Fed either buys or sells.
So, fun fact, talking about debt securities here, the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know when that was founded?
No, give me that one. When did they kick off the rodeo?
1934 by Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Wow, hand in glove, right?
Oh,
I mean, the
my
irony,
gosh.
the irony of the fact.
Do you honestly believe he won an election, or was he put there? Like, seriously, let's ask the question.
I think it's a fair question to ask. I'll give a balanced answer, which I think if you did enough due diligence and research on there, I think there could be a preponderance of evidence to suggest that it wasn't a fair and democratic election. But I don't know that, and it would be, that's conjecture. I can't speak against history without researching. What I can say is that the SEC tweeted that the Bitcoin ETF was approved a day before it happened, which is hella ironic because they're literally committing the very thing they're supposed to be legally enforcing, which is like, don't mess with people's money, protect investors. Somebody hacks the SEC Twitter account, tweets out a fake approval, the market jumps. Then they say, oh, whoops, the market collapses. And then they come back a short time later and they say, oh, actually, it's approved. somebody made bank on that move. I mean,
Mhm.
and I just wrote in the book, this is another one of those Easter eggs like Soma or
Mhm.
April Fool's Day, is that the very organization that should be investigating the SEC's Twitter account is the SEC. It's just
It's
like one of those paradoxes where you're like, wait, who's going to guard the guards? How does this happen? I mean, if that's not market manipulation, I don't know what is. I'm not saying it was necessarily their fault, but I am saying it manipulated the hell out of the market, and it looks really sus, you know.
like many
Like,
things do.
yeah, many things do, and the more you know, the more the more suspicious things seem. And so, I think it's always good to have a healthy amount of suspicion, but also be willing to be wrong,
Mhm.
and when people show that they are honorable, to also trust with really high levels of trust. That's important too.
Absolutely. I don't think we should ever be in a position where we just, whatever is um, put our way, communicated to us or the masses, just a knee jerk reaction, not believe it. I think you've
Yeah.
got to look. I think the secret is understand you're being told some half truths and try and think through for yourself critically and where are these half truths? Where are they? And
Mhm.
then what are they actually trying to lead me to believe? Because they're not going to tell you the whole truth. They're just not.
No, no, and you nailed it with half truths, which is like another thing. That same humanities teacher that told me to, burn a hole when I write an essay,
Mhm.
he also gave us this lesson about lying, and like the best way to lie is to tell as much of the truth as possible,
Mhm. Yeah,
right?
the
And
masters
that's
of
that
psyops
half
know
truth.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, give them a lot of the truth, and then just a little bit, just the part you need to manipulate. Change that. Don't change everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I do like this overarching thesis that we've kind of roundabout came on today, which is this Bernaysian, Netflixian propaganda, PR, maligning, denigrating the hodler. Hodlers are like hoarders. How does this all interrelate? And it does come Freudian, subconscious. It comes down to the psychological, and that we empower ourselves when we delve into these arenas with clarity and with the sword of truth, wanting what's true, and hunting it. um and I think that, I think that that's how we become strong. And ultimately, as we know, like the toolkit for that strength is Bitcoin. you know
Yeah.
People are like, when are you
100%.
going to sell? You're like, sell for what?
Yeah.
Now, I don't mind people taking a little cream off the top if you want to, buy your house or take care of this or that, and they won't accept Bitcoin. That's perfectly understandable. But as
Mhm.
far as like your core position of what you understand, like sell for what makes no sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah, exchange your hard-earned Bitcoin for something that's going to improve your life, but selling it
Exactly.
for a fiat currency
Right. Like,
for the
oh, I
mad
made a
gains.
gain. It's like, wow, you better plow that right into an immediate life need, you know?
Yeah,
And if you
absolutely.
do, more power to you, because then
Yeah.
you've transmuted that energy. You took that gain, you turned it into your house, you turned it into that family vacation that gave your experiences, or whatever the case may be. Be prudent with your money, but if you're just selling for fiat, like you haven't done the homework.
Mm-mm. Right. Well, let's wrap it up.
Yep.
If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
Mhm. I would give my last orange pill to the president of whatever the poorest country in the world is right now. I don't know what that is. I haven't done that research, but I would do that research, find that president, and give them an orange pill. Because if Nayib Bukele has shown us anything, it's that by purchasing Bitcoin with fiat, you can claw your way out of the pernicious entrapment of debt created by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which has interrupted the balance of power throughout the world. So I would find the poorest country and I would say, here's an orange pill. I'll see you in 10 years.
Love it. Thank you, Joseph, for coming on. Thank you for everything you've done here with the podcast and with your book. Pay attention to Bitcoin. Please pay attention to Bitcoin. That's all I want for people to do if they come here, if they find the podcast, go out and do their own research, find the books, find other podcasts. Where is the best place to buy your book? Is it purely Amazon, or do you have anywhere else?
Snag it on Amazon. If you really want to etch your way into my heart, leave me a review, please.
All right. So I'll put you in touch with Nico at Consensus Network, bitcoinbook.shop. I'm sure he'd love to host this for you as well. And then plebs can go and find it and buy it using Bitcoin and support your work and the Bitcoin company as well. So I'll make that intro after the show.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks for the time, Princey, and everything you do on the show. Excellent work.
No problem. You're welcome. And yeah, I look forward to, perhaps we'll meet up at a conference or something next year, and I look forward to shaking your hand.
Absolutely. Take care.
See you, mate.